Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson. Coming up on this week's episode, we're speaking with the Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, one of the nation's preeminent African-American ministers and a civil rights activist, about the role of the Black church in the modern era and how the Black church should respond to the new Donald Trump era. It's all coming up on this week's episode of Bankole's Nation. Stay with us. All right, let's welcome to the program the Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III, the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas and one of the nation's preeminent African-American religious voices in the modern era. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Haynes.
Oh, Brother Thompson, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you, your work. I read a book by Jamel Hill last year, and she was talking about when she was in journalism school in Michigan State. She said that one of the things that turned her on was that to be a journalist was to be a watchdog. And I want to thank you for your fiery conscience that has allowed you to uphold the standard of being a journalistic watchdog. We need more of you, and I want to thank you and salute you.
Thank you, Brother Haynes. Let me begin with the Black church, though, because you've been speaking around the country, especially after Trump's election. Well, let me start with this. Were you surprised by the November 5th election results?
I mean, the sad reality is no. America is going America. That night, I won't forget, I received several messages asking me, how do you feel? I said, I'm hopeful, but I don't trust this country. And this country has a track record that fed that distrust that it would do something that, could have been, the transformation of the trajectory of this country. And so, unfortunately, I was not surprised.
After the election, a lot of people that I've spoken with feel very apprehensive, scared. They don't know what's going to happen in 2025. As a minister and as a pastor, sometimes people come to you looking for counseling. And I want to go down that road. The role that you see the Black church playing January 28th, after Donald Trump gets sworn in as president of the United States.
Wow. Well, I think there's both apprehension and anxiety. I've had too many conversations. I won't even forget, I had to preach in Richmond, Virginia on November 6th. And the church, I've preached there for many years. It was jam-packed. And I could just feel the weight of the moment in that the people, and it was confirmed in their response afterwards, are definitely, as you said, apprehensive. They're anxious. And quite fearful. I had a long conversation last night with someone, and she was just talking about how on her own job, she has a big corporate job, and she says that there is an emboldened racism that is now feeding a climate that was already, somewhat hostile to what it means to be a Black woman in upper management. And so the bottom line is we are in for a rough ride. To use the language of Dr. King, we've got some difficult days ahead. And so the Black church, for me, will have several responsibilities. Number one, it's going to be so important that we provide a healing refuge, a safe space for our people so that the God we talk about, who's a heart fixer and a mind regulator, we need to provide that safe space. We cannot go on with business as usual. I was with intentionality going on YouTube, checking out, okay, what are my colleagues preaching the Sunday after November 5th? And, unfortunately, there were many who basically continued on with what they were already preaching by way of their series. Thankfully, there were others who shifted gears, as it were, recognizing the weight of the moment. And I think that there was a determination to provide a healing refuge. That has to continue, especially when we face, to me, what is going to be real traumatic on the third Monday after the third Sunday in January, where we commemorate the legacy of Dr. King. And at the same time, we watch this man, put his hand on his Trump Bible, and we know we move into a Project 2025 era, which will dismantle the civil rights movement, which will further gut voting rights and take us back as he is determined to do.
And that's what I want to talk
So,
about, the juxtaposition of Trump being sworn in and Martin Luther King Jr.'s observance.
Yeah. That for me is the ultimate paradox of what it means to be the yet to be United States of America. You have the celebration of a drum major for justice, and at the same time, you have someone being sworn into the highest office in the land who has defied justice, as it were, who will not go to prison for the crimes that he has committed, at least yet. You're having sworn in one who has been unabashed in his white supremacy and affiliation with white supremacists on the day of celebrating one who fought valiantly against white supremacy and, as a consequence of his leadership, brought about, along with so many other unsung sheroes and heroes, the second Reconstruction. And so his being sworn in that day represents the complete dismantling, if we're not careful, of that second Reconstruction. And then the last piece, I guess, that really hits me the more I think about it, is you're talking about one who held the Bible upside down, has a Bible that he is pimping, as it were, juxtaposed to a prophetic preacher, perhaps the greatest prophet that this country has ever produced, who dared to speak truth to power, and a truth that empowered and set the captives free. And so it's a real dangerous moment that will reflect, as it were, the two different choices that we have. And really, the more I think about it, the two different choices the Black church is going to have. Because are we going to, on that day, make a fresh commitment to King or to a president who wants to be king?
And as you're saying, I'm reflecting on the writings of the late Ken Hopefeld, the great theologian from Howard University, writing books such as Biblical Trouble in Biblical Waters, The Role of the Black Church. Do you feel that there's an opportunity here, though, for a reinvigoration of the collective Black church to stand up in 2025 and beyond, and really, play that historical role it always played?
Without question. And it's going to take this. The Black church is going to have to revisit her theology because, unfortunately, the more I've studied this, I witnessed during the enslavement period, what Henry Mitchell referred to as this abolition theology, where every Black church and every Black pastor made it her or his responsibility to transform their pulpits into platforms for abolition. And so there was an abolitionist theology that basically said, when you gather here for worship, be it in the hush harbor or be it in a worship facility up north, the bottom line is this worship and word is going to reflect an abolitionist theology, a theology that speaks to the ills of injustice that you face every time you exit these doors or exit this hush harbor. And I think we have to go back to that kind of abolitionist theology, where the theology that we are imparting to the people in the pews has everything to do with the anti-Black white supremacy and anti-othering, xenophobia, all of the oppressions that are out there. If the pulpits are not doing that, then we are in trouble. And again, on that day, January 20th, We are choosing this day whom we're going to serve. Are we going to serve the Jesus who's King of Kings and the King of King, as in Martin King, or this president who is set up to be king with the small k? And so our theology has to change. We cannot, and I started down this road earlier, but we cannot continue to embrace the theology of white Christian nationalism. We cannot embrace the theology of white evangelical Christianity, because that theology, sadly, when we look at what happened at the end of the 19th century, you have the development of Baptist conventions, and they basically embraced a structure of the Southern Baptist Convention. So you embrace a structure of the very convention that wanted to be a convention only at the expense of your freedom. And we continued that on into the end of the 20th century. And you have this church growth movement, and many Black churches, in order to grow, quote unquote, their numbers and their money, adopted a theology of white evangelical Christianity. And that continues sadly to this day. There are very few pulpits in our quote unquote mega churches that preach a liberation theology. That has to shift. That has to change. We cannot afford to go on with white theology in blackface when people show up on Sundays. We have to be that refuge, that safe space, but also we have to be that abolitionist headquarters, like we were at the end of enslavement and like we were during the civil rights movement.
White theology in blackface reminds me of Frantz Fanon, but this is a nice segue into the results of the election. We saw majority of white men, majority of white women voting for Donald Trump instead of the Vice President Kamala Harris. What is your reaction to that? And what is the challenge to the modern white church today in America?
Well, sadly, they just did what they do. Their love of whiteness was greater than their commitment to democracy. And when your love of whiteness is greater than your commitment to democracy, you will embrace neo-fascism. You will embrace an authoritarian person who is in no way serious about being a leader of the free world, because his main agenda is power for the agenda of greed, for the agenda of accumulating more wealth for himself and his friends. And so many of the white women and white men who voted for him, they will not benefit from his whiteness. And yet that's the history of this country. What did LBJ say? You take the lowest white person economically, most impoverished, as long as he feels he is above Black people, he's going to be all right. And you can pick his pocket while making him feel that he's okay because he is above the highest Black person. And so that sickness of whiteness was reflected in this election. And, whiteness did what whiteness does. And the sad reality is we're going to pay for that because number one, the country was born sick like that. And the sickness or the infection continues to spread. And this election was a chance to at least stop the spread of the election, of the infection. But instead, the infection is now spreading ad nauseum. I'll put it like that.
And the challenge to the white church, what is your challenge to the modern white church?
Well, the challenge to the white church is to stop being white. The white church has an ugly history of being on the wrong side of history. When Donnie Swaggart had the gall to go viral and check the Black church, my clapback to him was, there would be no Black church if the white church wasn't so white it never got around to being a church. And so the white church has to look itself in a mirror that is consistent and honest with the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, a brother from the hood in Nazareth, which again, they have to create a Jesus in their image and likeness because their real religion is whiteness. And I guess that for me is the challenge for the white church. And that is to ask themselves the question, are you going to be white or are you going to be a church? And if you're going to be the church, then you've got to check the theology that has what? Supported slavery, created the climate for Jim and Jane Crow segregation, supporting it fully, as well as always being on the wrong side of history and justice. The funny thing is, Donnie Swaggart goes off on the black church, but Donnie Swaggart has not said a word about Cancer Alley. Donnie Swaggart has never said a word about the place of education in the state of Louisiana, around 48th or 49th in the country. He's never said a word about poverty in Louisiana, and yet he thinks he can call out the black church. But again, when whiteness is your religion, then you will be more white than you ever will be a church. And so my challenge to the white church is you take a good look in the mirror and start dealing with whiteness. And if you deal with whiteness, then maybe we can save this country.
And finally, Dr. Haynes, I want to talk about the role of Black women in democratic politics. We have talked about what Black women have always done. They've always showed up. I remember 4 years ago, 8 years ago, when Trump was elected, there was a women's march, and there was a call for all women to show up, white women, Black women, and so forth. This time around, given that Black women stayed with Vice President Kamala Harris, who made history as the first Black woman nominee, and white women went the other way, do you see that as creating a fracture, if you will, within the so-called women's movement here?
No question, because again, there was a definite choice in terms of moving forward or going backward. And sadly, white women did what white women have done in the past. And so I hate to put it this way, but it's really hard to be a Black woman, to be a Black person with a conscience and trust white women. I'm not putting them all in one basket of distrust, but I am saying that for that vast majority to go for Donald Trump, knowing everything that's at stake, even as it relates to your bodily autonomy, and yet rights. You chose to, exactly, reproductive rights, and yet you chose to move in that direction. You chose whiteness. And the signal to all of us is that we need to be very discerning as to who our allies are. I salute Black women. Black women have been, they've been those ones who have stood up. One of them ones for the party, for democracy. I salute Black women. I thank God for Black women. I hurt for Black women because Black women were betrayed. And since Black women were betrayed, as a Black man, I have a responsibility to have their back in a way that they feel is appropriate. And one of the things I'm just sharing is we have to take another look at that relationship with white women. And it's just really hard to trust a lot of our sisters who are without melanin.
Finally, before I let you go, at Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, what are you telling your congregation members?
Well, in this season,
how to brace themselves up for 2025.
Right. Well, I'm beginning with the notion that it's very important to take time out to heal because a lot of us are in grief. And so we're going through those stages of grief. I'm in the anger stage right now, and I may stay here a while. And so walking them through those stages, and I have members who are saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they're angry, they're hurt, they're wounded, and they're going through those stages. And there is a Buddhist principle that says whenever you are making a decision, you do it from a place of peace and not reacting. And so right now, it's very important to go through that process until we get to a place of peace. And then we can start making the decisions that we need to make. The second piece I want to suggest is that I am going to be pushing us to be a part of the resistance We cannot go along to get along. We've got to be a part of the resistance. Kelly Carter Jackson has an amazing book called We Refuse, dealing with the history of resistance in our community as expressed in her family. And one of the things that she talks about in the book is the fact that as a part of the resistance, it means we claim responsibility for the choices that we make, though limited they may be. We have an opportunity to be a part of the resistance. And so for me, I'm going to be preaching a theology of resistance, resistance for Reconstruction. If the Black church had everything to do with the first Reconstruction, the second Reconstruction, in one way or another, surely we've got to be responsible for the third Reconstruction and at least lay the groundwork for that. But it cannot take place if there is no theology of resistance, a theology that leads to Reconstruction. And then for me, finally, it's going to be very important that we basically have a theology that is liberative, because the Black church has got to check the Black church when it comes to liberation. We're going to have to ask ourselves the question that was posed by, I can't think of his name right now, but he wrote the speech for King for 1967, April 4th. And his question was, do you want to be free, or do you want everybody to be free? Yeah, that's right. That's right. He said, do you want to be free, or do you want everyone to be free? And then, of course, he's piggybacking on our girl, Fannie Lou Hamer, who said that my freedom is shackled to yours. And so in the Black church, we've got to get over some of our stuff with the LGBTQIA community. We've got to get over some of our stuff where we discriminate and otherize those who are othered in the community. And we've got to make the Black church that safe haven, that safe space where Jesus can basically say, I was hungry, you fed me, thirsty, you gave me something to drink. Jesus can say, Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, anointed me to preach good news to the poor, set the captives free. I say that especially because, unfortunately, the Black church has abandoned the poor. How many sermons do we hear today as it relates to the plight of the impoverished? How many sermons do we hear today as it relates to what's happening among those who are captives of our criminal justice system that is criminal and unjust? And so the Black church has got to engage in a theology of resistance, Reconstruction. We've got to put a mirror to our face and make sure we are truly that liberation station.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, for being here.
Thank you. My honor.